"Please, sir, don't let them take me," she whispered. Rancher didn't just save her. He did more. Thick smoke drifted through Snake Valley, painting the sky a dusty red. Jack Miller reined in his horse, eyes narrowing on the wreckage below. An overturned wagon, its wheel still spinning, 2 bodies lying still in the dust. Then he heard it. A voice, faint and trembling, carried through the smoke. "Please, sir, don't let them take me." He jumped down, rifle in hand, and moved toward the wreck. Something shifted. Beneath a broken board, he found her. A girl no older than 8. Dirt streaked her face, one arm bruised, her small body trembling. Her eyes locked onto his, full of terror and pleading. Jack hesitated, just for a breath. Then he reached in and pulled her into his arms. She didn't cry, just held on, silent and shaking. And Jack knew with absolute certainty he wouldn't be riding home alone. Since his wife died, Jack Miller lived in silence. Twin Pines Ranch ran like clockwork, but his heart didn't. He avoided town, skipped Sunday sermons, and spoke only when the wind wouldn't answer. The house stayed clean but hollow. Her books still lined the shelves. Her lilac perfume clung to the corners of their room. Neighbors gave up calling. Jack didn't blame them. He wasn't angry, just emptied. Each morning he fixed fences, fed horses, and cooked for one. At night he locked the doors, not from fear, but habit. The willow over her grave bent lower with each passing year. Then came the girl, small, broken, wordless at first. But when she looked at him, something shifted. Not joy, not yet, but a flicker of something he thought long dead. Hope. Her name was Emily Cooper. She was 8 years old and had watched her parents die. The first few nights she barely spoke, just clutched a ragged doll, its face worn smooth, one arm missing, and stared at the fire with wide, silent eyes. When Jack tried to ask what happened, she flinched. When Mrs. June Baker, the ranch's housekeeper, offered her food, she nodded but didn't smile. Mrs. Baker had been with the ranch since before Jack's wife passed. Tough and practical, she'd never been one for sentiment. But the moment she saw Emily, something in her softened. "She's not just scared," she whispered to Jack that evening, while the girl slept curled by the hearth. "She's shattered." Jack said nothing. He just looked at the girl, how she held that doll like it was the last real thing in her world. By the 3rd morning, Emily started following Jack as he moved about the property. Not close, always a few paces behind, like a shadow unsure of its shape. She watched how he saddled the horses, how he checked the fences, how he paused beneath the willow tree and stared at nothing. When he offered her an apple from his coat pocket, she took it with both hands, eyes never leaving his face. She didn't say thank you, just nodded once firmly, like a deal had been struck. It wasn't until a week later that she finally spoke a full sentence. She was helping June sort dried beans on the kitchen floor, the old doll resting beside her, when she looked up and asked quietly, "Do bad men always come back?" June looked to Jack, who froze in the doorway, boots heavy with dust. He met the girl's gaze and shook his head. "Not if they're smart," he said. That night, Emily didn't flinch in her sleep. Over time, little things changed. She began humming to herself when she played outside, drew pictures in the dirt with a stick, even asked to ride the small bay mare Jack used for fence work. But fear never fully left her eyes. Sometimes she'd stop mid-step, staring at the hills beyond the pasture. Her fingers would tighten on that doll, and Jack would feel his chest tighten in return. Whatever had happened out there, whoever had left that wagon in ruins, hadn't disappeared. It lingered, in Emily's silence, in her dreams, and in the way she never stood near windows after dark. Jack knew what it meant to carry something heavy and unseen. He knew how long it took to feel safe again, if it ever came at all. So he didn't push. He just stayed close. Jack rode out before dawn the next morning, saddle cold, sky still black. He hadn't told Emily where he was going. Just left a note on the table and an extra log in the fire. Mrs. Baker gave him a look as he mounted up. The same look his wife once gave when she knew he was walking into something he might not come back from. He nodded to her, then rode. The wreckage of the wagon still lay out in Snake Valley, scorched and torn. The bodies had been moved by who, he didn't know. But the scene had changed. A new set of boot tracks circled the ashes, fresher than the rest. Jack followed them across the dry ridge and into the trees. That's where he saw the horse. Black, saddle worn but expensive. Ground-tied like its rider was nearby. Jack dismounted quietly and crouched low. And then he saw him. Ray Carson. Land baron. Ditchwater mean. The kind of man who always smiled too much and never blinked when he spoke. Jack had known Carson for years. Long enough to know what that smile meant. He was kneeling by the wagon ruins, running something through his fingers. Wood. Maybe bone. Jack stepped forward. "Looks like you're scouting early," he said. Carson turned, slow, like he'd known Jack was there all along. "Just seeing what the fire left behind," he said. "Terrible thing, what happened out here?" Jack didn't answer. Carson stood, brushing off his knees. "You see it? The wreck. I saw it. Tragedy. That poor girl. Assuming she made it. Can't imagine what she saw." Jack kept his eyes on Carson's hands. They didn't twitch, didn't fidget. Too still. "I heard rumors," Carson continued, "that someone found a girl wandering out here, half dead. Can't say I believe everything I hear, but makes a man curious." Jack said nothing. Carson took a slow step forward. "See, the thing about kids. Sometimes they remember more than they should. Faces, voices, places. Then maybe you should be afraid of her memory," Jack said. Carson paused, then smiled wider. "Maybe." He mounted his horse without another word and rode off, dust curling behind him. Jack watched until he was gone. Then he turned back toward the ranch. That evening he sat with Emily by the fire. She was braiding a scrap of twine around her doll's wrist. Quiet but focused. Jack cleared his throat. "There's something you need to know," he said. "The man I saw today, he's dangerous. He might come looking for you. For us." Emily didn't look up, just kept braiding. "He was at the wagon," she said softly. "He smiled at my mama before he—" Her voice caught, then went still. Jack felt the air change. "I saw him," she whispered, "from under the seat. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just watched him walk away." Jack stared at her, heart sinking. He hadn't realized she remembered. He knelt down beside her. "You're safe now," he said. "No one's safe," she answered. "Not if he's still out there." Jack stood that night at the kitchen table, papers spread out before him. Deeds, property lines, legal codes. He wasn't a lawyer, but he didn't need one. He needed to make her his. Officially. He rode into town the next morning and walked into the county clerk's office with boots caked in dust and a face carved from stone. When the clerk saw who it was, she straightened in her chair. "I need to file for emergency guardianship," Jack said. "Of a minor. Emily Cooper." The clerk hesitated. "Jack, are you sure?" He slid a weathered photograph across the counter. Emily, asleep on the porch, arms around that broken doll. Face peaceful for the first time since he'd found her. "I'm sure," he said. By dusk, the paperwork was filed. Signatures inked. The judge would review it in the morning, but Jack didn't wait for approval. He returned home and told Emily over supper. She didn't say much, just nodded and set her fork down. Then she stood up, walked around the table and hugged him. It was the first time she touched him without fear. Jack didn't move for a long moment. Then his arms wrapped around her, slow, careful, as if he'd never held anything so fragile in all his life. Outside, the wind picked up through the cottonwoods. Carson's world had just shifted, and Jack Miller had just declared war. They came at night. Not men. Not yet. Just a note, folded and slipped through the barbed wire at the edge of the north pasture. Jack found it caught in the fence early one morning, the paper torn slightly by the wind. No envelope, just 5 words, scrawled in a thick, confident hand. "Return the girl, or burn." He stood there a while, fingers tight on the page, the sun climbing over the hills like it didn't know any better. Jack didn't show the note to Emily or June. He burned it in the stove that evening, slow and silent. But something shifted in him after that. He stopped riding to town alone, repaired the locks on the barn, checked his rifle twice before dusk. He didn't say anything aloud, but June Baker noticed. "You expectin' trouble?" she asked over breakfast, her eyes sharp. "I'm expectin' company," Jack said. He wasn't wrong. The next sign came 2 days later. Sheriff Colby stopped by on his rounds, or so he claimed. But Jack knew when a man came looking for something behind his eyes. Colby stepped down off his horse, dusting off his badge. "Jack," he said, "heard a rumor. Said you filed guardianship papers. Little girl survivor from the Valley wreck." "That's right," Jack said. Colby took off his hat, held it at his side. "Not saying it's a problem. Just words spreading fast." Jack didn't answer. Colby hesitated, then leaned in. "Ray Carson came by the office yesterday. Left a donation for the town schoolhouse. 500 in coin. Generous," Jack said flatly. "Also asked about you. About Emily. About property lines." Jack didn't blink. "He buy a star with that money?" "No. But he bought a favor. Judge hasn't signed the guardianship papers yet. Carson's trying to stall." Jack's jaw tensed. "I don't care what he's trying." The sheriff sighed. "Just keep your eyes open, Jack. You may be a stubborn man, but Carson plays with fire." That night, Jack didn't sleep. The next morning, June stepped outside to gather eggs and found something new waiting on the porch. A silver coin, centered on the doorstep. Clean, polished, resting on a small pile of ash. She called Jack. He stared at it, then knelt down slowly. The ash was cold. Charred wood, most likely. Cedar. Fresh. He picked up the coin and turned it over. On the back, scratched faintly into the surface, were 3 letters. E.C. Emily Cooper. Jack stood up and turned toward the hills. "You picked the wrong girl," he muttered. The third warning came in flames. Mrs. Ada Weaver's barn, a quarter-mile from Twin Pines, went up in smoke just after midnight. Jack and 2 neighbors rode hard through the night to help, forming a line from the creek with buckets. The fire took the roof, the hay, and half her winter grain. No one saw who lit it, but they all knew why. Carson wasn't just threatening anymore. He was acting. The next morning, Emily came to Jack holding something tight in her small hands. "My doll," she whispered. "I found something inside." She'd been holding that doll every night since he found her. Jack had never looked too closely, out of respect maybe, but now she showed him a seam, newly torn, inside the fabric body. Inside was a bundle of papers, rolled tight and sealed in oilskin. Jack unwrapped it gently. Inside were maps, hand-drawn, faded in places but clear enough. Lines of mineral deposits, elevations, notations in pencil, geological survey maps, detailing veins of silver beneath Snake Valley. Deep veins, and every path, every tunnel, every access point ran straight through land Carson had just bought. Every vein ended near the Cooper family claim. Emily's family had owned land there. Land Carson had burned. Jack's stomach turned. This wasn't just about threats anymore. Carson wanted something, and Emily, with her hidden maps and broken doll, had it. Jack met Carson 2 days later, face to face, in the middle of Main Street. No guns were drawn. Not yet. But the look in Jack's eyes turned the air cold. "You sent fire," Jack said. Carson's smile was all white teeth and calculation. "I sent a message." "You want the maps," Jack said. "I want the truth buried," Carson answered. "Where it belongs." Jack stepped closer. "She's a child. She's a witness," Carson snapped. "And this territory doesn't need any more martyrs." The sheriff arrived before it could turn bloody. But the lines had been drawn, and everyone in town felt it. War was coming. Back at the ranch, Jack unrolled the maps again under lamplight. June stood behind him, arms crossed, jaw tight. "You gonna give it to him?" she asked. Jack didn't answer right away. "She deserves peace," June said. "But peace don't come easy. Not with men like Carson in charge." "I'm not giving her up," Jack said. "Not for silver." Not for anything. He paused, then added, and I'm not giving him the maps either. Then what? June asked. Jack looked toward the dark window. I give them to the law. The real law. Federal Circuit Judge comes through next week. I give them everything. The land records, the fire, the threats. Let him see what Carson's protecting. You trust the law now? I trust the truth, Jack said. If we don't stand for that, what's left? That night, Emily came to him quietly. Papa, she said, the word still new on her tongue. I remember something else. Jack turned to her gently. What is it? When they burned the wagon, I heard one of them say your name. Jack's blood froze. Carson said, tell Jack Miller this is the cost of being a hero. He closed his eyes and everything fell into place. Carson hadn't just found out by accident. He'd known. He was watching, waiting, and this wasn't about land. It was about revenge. Jack knelt beside her. You're safe, he whispered. I promise. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. They wouldn't all survive what came next. The bullet that killed Ray Carson never came from Jack Miller's gun. 2 weeks after the confrontation in town, Carson rode south to Tucson, thinking distance would cool the fire. But men like Carson only burn hotter under pressure. He drank more, threatened louder, began asking questions of the wrong kind of men. And one night, in a saloon thick with sweat and cigar smoke, he pushed too far. No one knew exactly who pulled the trigger. Maybe it was one of his own guards. Maybe it was a partner tired of the heat. Or maybe Justice just walked in off the street wearing spurs and no name. What mattered was this. Carson fell. And with him, his secrets came spilling out. The maps Jack had turned over to the circuit judge were already making their rounds. Land deeds, forged transactions, and a list of bribes paid to local officials surfaced like bones in a flood. The fire at the Cooper wagon? Now officially investigated as arson tied to a land dispute. Jack received a letter from the judge 3 days after Carson's death. It was short, stamped in red. Adoption finalized. Guardianship confirmed. Investigation into Mr. Carson's estate opened. No ceremony. No fanfare. Just ink on paper. But to Jack, it was a quiet kind of thunder. He showed the letter to Emily that night. She read the words slowly, lips moving as she traced each line. When she reached the last sentence, she looked up at him with eyes that didn't tremble anymore. So I'm really yours now? Jack nodded once. As real as it gets. She smiled, small and steady, and wrapped her arms around his waist. And Jack, who had once thought love was something buried under 6 feet of willow roots, felt the weight of the world shift off his shoulders. It was over. Not the grief, not the fear, but the running, the hiding, the fight for one small, broken life. They had won. Together. The evening came soft and slow. Sunset painted the fields in gold, the cottonwoods casting long shadows across the pasture. Jack sat on the porch with a mug of coffee in his hand, boots crossed, hat tilted back. The war was over, at least, the kind a man could see. In the yard below, Mrs. Baker knelt by the flower beds near the barn, her hands deep in the earth. Beside her, Emily pressed seeds into the soil one at a time, careful and focused, her tongue poking from the corner of her mouth like she was painting a masterpiece. Jack watched them, heart steady for the first time in years. Papa, Emily called, not looking up. Can we use some of the silver money to help other kids? The ones like me. Jack leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. That's the wisest idea I've ever heard, he said. Emily smiled, wide and sure, and reached for another seed. The wind picked up just enough to rustle the leaves. A few birds called from the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied and a gate clinked shut. Life. Simple. Honest. Jack glanced toward the willow tree in the back pasture. It still stood quiet and strong, the grave beneath it now tended with fresh flowers. He missed her, his wife. He always would. But tonight, the ache was gentler. Not gone. Just changed. Because now, laughter echoed in the house again. The fire crackled not just for warmth, but for comfort. And when he looked at Emily, he didn't see a shadow anymore. He saw a future. Later, As dusk deepened, they sat together on the porch. Emily leaned against him, the doll in her lap mended and whole. June Baker rocked gently beside them, the hum of an old hymn barely audible in the breeze. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The sky turned dark, the stars came out, and peace, real quiet peace, settled over the land. For the first time in a long time, Jack Miller wasn't alone. He was home. And home, he realized, wasn't a place. It was a promise kept.